Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on the weaponization of prayer, an analysis of the Russian Orthodox military cathedral. It gives us great pleasure on behalf of the Institute for the Study of Eastern Christianity, the Bishop Basil H. Lawson Center for Ukrainian Church Studies here at the Catholic University, and the Huffington Ecumenical Institute at Loyola Marymount University to hold this important webinar to look at something that's been very interesting to me. This notion of a military cathedral just on the outskirts of Moscow, and to understand what the iconographic program is all about. So today we have as our first guest, Mr. Sergei Chapnin. Mr. Sergei Chapnin is a senior fellow of the Orthodox Christian Studies Center at Fordham University. He's a specialist in the field of multidisciplinary study of the Eastern Orthodox Christianity, with particular specialization in problems of church-state relations, the general role of religion in post-Soviet Russian society, and the modern history of the Russian Orthodox Church. As an insider, he has profound understanding of the contemporary structure, ethos, influence, and ideological power of the Russian Orthodox Church in Putin's Russian Federation. Another area of his specialization is contemporary Christian art, including iconography, icon painting, architecture, design, calligraphy, and the visual arts. So we invite you to listen in, and Mr. Chapnin will now give his presence. Thank you so very much, Sergei, for joining us today. We're very appreciative for your presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Mark. Thank you for the invitation. And I do agree that this military cathedral that was consecrated 3 years ago in Moscow suburbs is an important object and an important concept that shows the kind of merge of church and state in contemporary Russia. And I will speak more about that. I'll just share the screen and switch on the presentation. So yes, that's it. So we should start with a few preliminary remarks. The Russian Church considered itself a mega church that went through a significant religious revival. You see the numbers. I gave two dates, 1988 and 2019. Of course, we should add the third column and kind of cut the last numbers are sort of at least 30% because of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that proclaimed its independence from Moscow Patriarchate. But anyway, these numbers are amazing. They show of course they show not the quality of the faith, so to say, but just the numbers. And these numbers are that's the only place in the world when you can see this growth of the church. But again, let's speak more of the quality and not of the numbers. So the Russian Orthodox Church survived during communism, revived in 90s and 2000s, and for the last, I would say, more than 10 years now, is in deep crisis. Part of this crisis is because, kind of one of the angles that we could look at the Russian Orthodox Church is an attempt that Russian Church is trying to be a partner, an ideological partner of the state. That was almost from the very beginning, at least from late 90s. Of course, being a partner of the church means the partnership with the Russian military, with the Russian secret services, and all this apparatus that is controlled by FSB, by former KGB now. So this small and, well, very, I would say, unpleasant church is one of the first churches built at the military военные городки, kind of military camps on Moscow suburbs. This is the church of Saint Elijah the Muromets, in the headquarters of the Russian strategic missile forces. This church was built in late 90s, and you see it's not, well, it's just bricks. The project is rather average, nothing special. So the type of chapels that kind of transportable chapels in military camps look like that. This is a typical one. Of course, what the military chaplains do are they kind of, that's the style. They bless almost everything, and you see here how the priest is blessing strategic missiles that could have also nuclear, that could be also nuclear missiles. And this is the last example of that's National Guard, Russian National Guard Church, consecrated half a year ago. So it's, you see again, it's quite small and simple. And the only the big church, the magnificent one, is in Kronstadt. This is the church that's the St. Nicholas Cathedral of the Russian Navy. And you see how kind of officers and soldiers attend services there. There is a certain tendency, of course, when Russian Church blessed the army, the tendency that kind of shows the merge of Christian and Soviet. When this pictures appeared back sort of 15 years ago, nobody took them seriously. They were just kind of jokes. But now we see that these jokes unfortunately came true, and these pictures reflect the mindset both of state bureaucracy and Russian bishops in the country. And that's another sign of this kind of, again, playing with symbols. But this play with symbols is not just in the kind of secular field. On the right picture, you see the almost the icon with Stalin in the center, and this icon was presented in the church. Then the church rejected this icon, but still it was sort of, it showed up in different places, and in a way, this is an attempt to justify the Stalin's period in Russian history. Now we're coming to the military cathedral. So that's the main view, and the whole title is the main church of the Russian of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. This church is situated some 40 kilometers from Moscow, and it's not just the church. It's a whole ensemble of different institutions, and you see the cathedral in the center, and around it there is a museum of the Second World War, or as the Russians call it, the Great Patriotic War. And there is a big square in front of it where many different events are taking place. There is a quite sophisticated lighting system, the computer lighting system, that could color the cathedral in different colors. That looks really magnificent. So this church is totally different from the military chapels and churches in other places. Now, this is also the example of the lighting system. It's not just painted or just the computer graphics. This is really how the cathedral looks like, and the idea behind is to present this church as a tourist object, because the community, of course, is there is no actual parish community there. This is a church in the kind of military park, or it's called the military park Patriot, Russian Patriot. And quite a few elements are designed to sort of to attract people and give them not that much the knowledge about the Christ, the gospel, or the church itself, but about the military history. Well, it's in a way, it's a manifestation of the official religion of contemporary Russia. And I call this official religion not Orthodox Christianity, but a kind of post-Soviet civil religion. Now, in this picture, we see the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Shoigu, which is the person on the left, and other generals that are war criminals now. And the main icon, this is the with painted, covered with gold. This is the main icon of the cathedral, and what is interesting about this icon, it also reflects the idea of this weaponization of prayer, because on the side doors and you see one to the right of the face of Christ, not the icons, not the sacred images are depicted, but different battles. The main part of this door is a picture of the battle, and only the tiny icon of the Mother of God that Russians believe was the patroning this battle is above this battle scene. So, so here you can see the very strange numerology that is implemented in this cathedral. For example, if we'll have a look at the bell tower on the left, we will see that it's written that it's 75 meters high. What does that mean, 75? And this is the anniversary of the victory in the Second World War, because the cathedral was built in 2020 and consecrated, so it was kind of 75 years from the date of the victory. Then we see the diameter of the drum, of the main drum in the center, it is 19 meters and 45 centimeters. And this is the year that the Second World War ended, the year of this victory. Now you see that diameter of the dome, of the central dome itself, is 22 meters, 43 centimeters. What is that? And that's the time when the act of capitulation was signed in the year 1945. So that's nobody knows that. So they put really strange. They are incorporated really strange data, or that's what I said about this capitulation. Now the other thing is, and they also kind of attach some symbolic meaning to that, 435 piles are driven into the foundation of the cathedral. So what does that mean, 435? And they comment, the architects commented like that if you will sum up 4, 3, and 5, you will get 12, and that's the number of the apostles. And the length of the piles are 15 meters. Sort of what does that mean? And sort of 15.0 meters. And that signs that the banner of the military regiment, the number, so 150 is the number of the military regiment that put the banner, the Soviet banner, on the Reichstag in 1945. So this is purely depicts the idea that the ideological significance of this cathedral is kind of shaped out not by the church, but by the Ministry of Defense, and actually the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu himself. There are striking examples of violation of the typical understanding of the design of the church. Here we see the kind of the main dome from the inside, and the stained glass which is in the cathedral, in the kind of main space of the cathedral. And what we see all over is in this round plates is different military orders, both of Russian Empire and of the Soviet Union. The next one, we will see that even the symbols of the atheistic state, this a well-known symbol of the Soviet Union, is also on the top of the cathedral. And what is wrong about that? We should say that the design of the church develops from earthly things near the floor, going to the heavenly things on the ceiling and in the dome. And we all know that no one will be able to take his earthly achievements, including orders, to the heavenly kingdom. And here we see totally opposite. This military orders are signs of kind of heavenly dignity, of heavenly significance. Now, another striking example of this violation is the mosaics in the main, also on the walls in the main part of the church. Again, we see these red banners that bury signs of the atheistic state, and the church is not against it. So it's kind of, that's the real merge of a Soviet and a Soviet atheistic tradition and the Christian tradition. The picture itself, please have a look at the soldiers. We all know that if somebody is depicted on the walls of the church or on the icon, the idea behind is that the church, the earthly church, we are as members of the church who attend the service, and the saints or the pious people and maybe pious soldiers who are depicted on the walls of the church pray together. It's the liturgy on earth that is kind of joins the liturgy which is in heaven. And here we see that these soldiers and officers, they are not praying at all. They present their guns. They are just staying and they are showing that they are ready to fight. They are ready for violence. They are ready to kill. And again, this is against the tradition. This is not what we intend to see during the prayer. This is not helping our prayer. This is against the kind of total atmosphere of the church. And here are a few other examples of the mosaics. You see that different saints are kind of patron saints of Russian and Soviet army during different periods of Russian history. Now there are also, we should mention a few scandals that arose before the cathedral was consecrated. On the left picture, you see the sketch of the mosaic where Putin, Shoigu, and some other Russian politicians were depicted in the center. This is the mosaic which is called "Навеки с Россией," forever with Russia, and Krym nash, Crimea is ours. So that's the idea of the reunification, as Russia presents it, reunification of Crimea with Russia. And there was a scandal because not that many people were happy to see Putin's picture in the cathedral. And finally, it was replaced by just kind of, you see this white circle on the right, on the picture on the right, just with average people and priests carrying the Korsunskaya icon of the Mother of God. And another scandal also arose. You see on the left picture, the white circle, Stalin himself was depicted, supposed to be depicted on the walls of the church, which is a scandal. We know, though, he was graduated he studied in the seminary, but he was the one who shaped the policy, proclaimed the policy of the state atheism, and put heavy repressions or persecutions on the church. And church officials who were commenting this picture said, well, that's the historic truth, you know, that Stalin was the chief commander of the Soviet army during the Second World War. And because this picture shows the military parade on the Red Square in Kremlin before, after the Victory Day in June 1945. So it's okay because that's historical truth. It's okay to depict him. But again, because of the scandal, the state officials and the church officials agreed that Stalin's portrait should be replaced with some other picture. Now, this is the main altar of the cathedral, and we see a rather strange sculpture of Christ in the apse. What is strange about this sculpture? The sculpture was done not by a Christian, but by a Buddhist architect, by the architect who is Buddhist. And because this Buddhist is a personal friend of the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, also from this Tuva region, he was asked to, the image of Christ that was done by Russian sculptor artists was replaced finally by this sculpture to show the kind of the unity of different nations and even different religions within this object, I would say, within this cathedral. And here is the translation of the amendment to the Russian Constitution of the Russian Federation that was adopted in summer 2020. That's the idea of this passage, one of the ideas, is to include mentioning of God in Russian Constitution. But let's have a look at the kind of at this paragraph itself. It's quite peculiar. The context in which God is mentioned is quite peculiar. You see, the Russian Federation, united by 1,000 years of history, preserving the memory of our ancestors who passed down to us ideas and faith in God, as well as the continuity in the development of the Russian state, recognizes the historical established state unity. So you see, God is important from this perspective, is not because he is God, but because he is a part of ideas and faith that our ancestors sort of passed down to those who live in Russia today. So in a way, it's a kind of technical God that serves Russian interests and not vice versa. It is not just not the Russian people or Russian state serves God. No, it's a technical God that serves Russia. And this cathedral that the pictures we saw earlier is a brilliant illustration of that. So Russia needs some kind of technical God that will not judge Russians themselves, but will help Russians in any case, even if Russians are committing crimes, military crimes, this technical God will stay with them. And that's we see that's the church of Saint Tatiana in Mariupol, destroyed or bombed by Russians are in the spring of last year. I will finish now, I think, with just one more slide. What I did in this short presentation is I would say the worst example of the Orthodox Christian architecture of the beginning of the 21st century. But within a month, on May 30, we will open a conference, The Shape of the Sacred, which will deal with kind of positive examples of the ecclesial architecture in different countries, in the United States, in Romania, in Poland, and in Russia also. So thank you very much for your attention. And this is just the kind of the really brief description of this military cathedral.
Thank you very much, Sergei, for this enlightening tour of the cathedral. It's something that I have been wanting to get my eyes on, some great photos of this, and I think that you provided us with a good illumination into some of the issues that are being presented, and we want to go a little bit deeper into all of these, and I just want to know all of our attendees to let them know that at the bottom of your screen there's a place for question and answers, and you can start putting in your question and answers there. And we're going to have a reflection now by our Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun, who has joined us. And so once he has finished his reflections, then we'll have a little bit of discussion between the three of us panelists, and then we'll be looking at your questions as well. So don't hesitate to put them in the question and answer period as we're talking, and then we'll get to them toward the end of this. So now I have the distinct honor and pleasure to present Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun, a professor of ecclesiology, international relations, and ecumenism at St. Ignatius College and the University College, Stockholm. He as well serves as the director of the Huffington Ecumenical Institute at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, and has graciously co-sponsored this with us. So we're thankful to him for that. He is a graduate of Theological Academy in Kiev and the National University in Athens. He accomplished his doctoral studies at Durham University under the supervision of Father Andrew Loth. He was the chairman of the Department for External Church Relations of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, first deputy chairman of the Educational Committee of the Russian Orthodox Church, and later research fellow at Yale and Columbia Universities, visiting professor at the University of Munster in Germany. He is an international fellow at Chester Ronning Center for the Study of Religion and Public Life at the University of Alberta in Canada, and as well an invited professor at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. We thank you very much, Father Cyril, and we look forward to hearing your questions and comments and thoughts as we begin to unpack and open up our understanding of what is going on in the deeper recesses and how we can look at the theology and more sort of a more subtle understanding of what's happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Father Mark, for your introduction. I'm particularly glad that we started this cooperation between the Huffington Institute and the Catholic University of America. Just yesterday had a meeting, annual meeting of the advisory board, and I reported about this cooperation. Everyone was happy and thrilled. So we look forward to more cooperation. I'm also grateful to Sergei Chaplin for his presentation. As usually, it is very insightful, illuminating, and concise. What I wanted to reflect upon is some kind of general points and some more particular points. Speaking generally, I think what we are witnessing, it's a result of the iconodulic nature of our cultures. Iconodulic as opposite to iconoclastic. And it has its connotation because doulos in Greek, it means also slave. So we have a kind of enslavement, to the images, and we are witnessing that images and sacred spaces have become another battlefield, in addition to the battlefields that we have in Ukraine. So effectively, what we are talking about a sort of a military action in the battlefield of images and sacred spaces. When on the one hand, one side, like in the case of this cathedral, and in the case of the iconography related to the war from the Russian side, we find experiments to justify the aggression, to justify the war, by sacralization, this war through images. On the other hand, and on the other side, we witness a similar attempt from the Ukrainian side to kind of rebuke this aggression, to counter-offense even with other images, other sets of images. Because since the war escalated in 2022, February 2022, in Ukraine, I've been witnessing the emergence of a specific iconography, which is relevant to this war. Probably the attendees of this seminar, of this webinar, know some examples of this iconography, like this, the Ukrainian Madonna from the metro, underground station, like this lady who holds a baby, nursing the baby, and it has become, like, this image has become viral and iconic, really iconic of what is happening in Ukraine. So we are witnessing two sets of imagery. In other words, the imagery of war, the imagery supporting the war, the imagery justifying and sacralizing the war, and on the other hand, the imagery of resistance, the imagery of opposing. And it's they stem from this, I mean, two sets of images, they stem from the same source, the iconodulic nature of our cultures, because both Ukrainian and Russian cultures, they are kind of rooted in these traditions of iconography, of veneration of icons, right? And this is a very interesting phenomenon indeed. I think the war can be studied through the iconographies. And this webinar is actually one of the attempts, one of the earliest attempts to study the war, from the perspective, in the light of iconographies. Also, what I want to emphasize is, yes, the title of our webinar is about the weaponization of prayer. I think it's to put it even maybe more precisely, we should speak about the weaponization of imagery and sacred spaces. There is also weaponization of prayer. If you take, for example, the prayer which was introduced by the Moscow Patriarchate, personally by Patriarch Kirill, to be read in the liturgies everywhere, under the jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate from 2014, actually, from when the war started, when the war began. That was the prayer which was weaponized, and it was read, it was supposed, and was kind of, people were obliged to read this prayer in the liturgy. And that is an example of the weaponization of prayer. And now we're dealing with the weaponization of images and sacred spaces. Also, I think we are dealing with the weaponization of holiness, sanctity, when some people, some saints are promoted as the symbols of the Russian grandeur. And I think that the most important figure in the pantheon, so to say, of the saints who have been employed to justify the war is Alexander Nevsky. I think he's really a favorite saint of Patriarch Kirill personally. And I know that Patriarch Kirill personally promoted and continues to promote Alexander Nevsky as a sort of, a symbol of his vision, of his understanding of what is Russia, and how Russia, needs to expand and, to behave and so forth. So he's really a an idea personified, so to say. We are talking about the ideas that drive the war. And some of those ideas have been visualized, like in the case of iconography, the new iconography. Some ideas have been put into stone, like in the case of this cathedral of the military forces, and some ideas have been personalized, personified, like in the case of Alexander Nevsky, for example, but not just him. I think this tradition probably happened started kind of or escalated somehow in 2000 when the Russian Church decided to canonize Nicholas II, the last Tsar from the Romanov dynasty in Russia. There was a resistance at the time against this because some people felt that it's a bit fishy. It's a bit of, it's about merging ideology and theology. Well, there is an interesting episode, in this kind of resistance to the canonization of Nicholas. I think the protagonist of the opposition became professor of the Moscow Theological Academy, Alexei Osipov, who has become now a protagonist of the pro-war party. He is now, a vehement advocate for the war. But at that time, he was against, the canonization of Nicholas II as a symbol of this transition of the Russian Church towards, serving ideological ends. So it's about the weaponization of saints. I should say that on the Ukrainian side, we are observing something not dissimilar. Like, for example, the attempts in the Ukrainian churches to get rid of some saints from their calendars who are associated with the Russian imperialism and with the current aggression. So there are talks, conversations, and even some actions to so to say purge, the Christian calendar, Orthodox calendar, from some dubious saints. And indeed, they are dubious. I mean, some saints whom we venerate, widely, they were introduced to the calendars for political reasons long time ago. If you take, for example, this very dubious saint Andrei Bogolubsky, who had destroyed Kiev, and he is kind of an old dweller, political dweller in the calendar, the shared calendar of the church, and he certainly personified, the Russian imperialism and dominance, since the imperial times. So those are kind of different source of weaponization that I think we need to distinguish. They are connected with one another: the weaponization of prayer, the weaponization of imagery, the weaponization of the sacred spaces, the weaponization of saints. The last thing I wanted to emphasize is what a strange curve the kind of politicization of religion has taken in Russia. So essentially, it started in the early 2000s, and maybe and Sergei rightly indicated, in the 1990s. It started with a sort of postmodern game when they started producing those, funny icons with Stalin and which was like a joke indeed. I agree with Sergei. And then I remember eventually even some icons with Putin were produced with him like depicted as Christ. And that at that time it was very postmodern. It looked like very postmodern, and nowadays the images remain the same, but the attitude to those images has changed. Nowadays they are not perceived as a joke; they are perceived as a reality. And very recently, I just 2 days ago, I had a chance I was interviewed by a Ukrainian TV channel on the icons of Putin that are being distributed on the occupied territories with the consent of the occupying administrations, of course. So it means that there is kind of a centralized policy to distribute, those, postmodern images of Putin depicted as Jesus Christ. And they are being distributed, among the populations, among the people on the occupied territories, and it's not a joke anymore. It's real, it's serious, which means that we are witnessing a kind of a transition back from postmodernity back to modernity. with the same images, of postmodernity. This is a very interesting development, I believe, that we need probably to take into consideration. So on this note, let me stop and give floor to the questions, and those are my reflections on the excellent presentation.
Thank you so much, Father Cyril. As the host and moderator, I get the chance of initiating our discussion here amongst us. I was drawn to this cathedral because I think it sort of shocked me a little bit. I think, as both of you have pointed out, that it's emblematic of a certain ideology, and I think it's something that we as Americans probably aren't as aware of, the way that religion is used, in places where religion is the state religion in many ways. And so I think that this is a good opportunity for us to look at this and to understand, well, what is political, what is theological, and at least for my tastes, I think that that these lines have been blurred completely, and there's a as we put in the title, this weaponization of prayer. So Sergey, if you don't mind, I'd like to turn to you first, and I'd like to have us take a brief look at how you might understand the icon system, and whether these icons are utilized somehow by even the soldiers themselves. Is it something that they're engaging, carrying around as these sort of tokens for them, or is this more of a sort of engagement for people who are coming to this military park, that they have the combination of the historical with the religious put together? What are your sort of thoughts about that?
Well, I think my main point is that what we are, we came, I think, together with Father Cyril on this wave of religious revival. We came to the church, we were baptized, we joined we became active in the church. And now we see that this revival turned into crisis, turned into deep crisis of the Russian Orthodox Church and I would say almost all the religious life in the post-Soviet space. So the reason for that, I guess, is the general intention of the, so to say, official church in Russia that decided to prove that the state, the new state in Russia, the Putin state, really needs the church, needs this ideological support and, in a way, spiritual support from the state. And this new Putin's empire will not survive without some without religious elements. And Putin took this idea seriously. There is a certain understanding between state officials and church officials that religious elements should be sort of almost everywhere in official state ideology, in state-controlled media, in Russian propaganda. And of course, when the annexation of Crimea back 9 years ago, now because of the invasion, the religious arguments were quite important for Russian politicians, as well as for Russian nation in general. So I would say the reaction of Ukraine is quite natural. So if Russia weaponized the Orthodox Church, then in a way, the Ukrainian side should do something similar, because that's the another kind of dimension of this hybrid war. And it's interesting that Zelensky, for example, he himself is not religious at all. And he was trying to sort of to stay away from religious arguments. But then he said, well, we need not only our kind of political independence, we need also a spiritual independence from Russia. And I think in a way, we will see now the kind of for the first time in the 21st century, we clearly see the religious dimension of this war, and it is serious. We see the kind of para-theological arguments, especially from Russian side, and this set of sermons, the sermons of the Patriarch Kirill during the wartime, and some other bishops and priests. Some of them are quite popular in Russia as preachers. They develop a rather sophisticated system of arguments, which I would say is not really Christian, which is not based on the gospel, which is not based on our Holy Fathers and tradition of the Church. It is based on certain mythological elements. Well, actually, I would say, at least in Russia, the theology is replaced by history. When you will sort of study carefully sermons of Patriarch Kirill, he's all the time speaking about history. He's speaking about Russian history, and history for him is much more important than theology. And from that perspective, and it's a kind of dead end, because if he had chosen the kind of the Russian Empire as the kind of golden age for Russia, then this is really dangerous for all Russian neighbors, for Baltic states, for Finland, for Ukraine, Belarus, Caucasus, and Asia. So I think we have to kind of suggest an alternative approach, a kind of Christian approach to all that arguments that they have. And I'm afraid that nor the Orthodox world, nor are the local churches, nor our Catholic Church, nor our Anglican Church, nor Protestants, nor theologians are in different universities, institutions. They even after the year after the invasion, they didn't take all these things seriously. I think my intention here is sort of, let's take all this stuff seriously. We have to do that.
Thank you, Sergei. That's a deeply interesting subject that you've prompted us, and I'd like to turn to Father Cyril as well, and maybe get some of your feedback and reflection on that, and especially in light, Father, of this whole question of theologizing. Where are we in theologizing this? One of our participants, Rob Peters, asked the question about what's happening here. We're more concerned about just war ideas, but it's only crusade against the West that we hear in some ways, and there's no limit to what this can do. And so what does this say about where Eastern theology is, as Sergei was trying to prompt us to think about, theological answers to this. So what are your thoughts, Father Cyril?
Right, thank you. Yes, we are dealing with a substitution, with mimicry. when theology is substituted with ideology, even though while pretending to be theology or continuing to be theology. And it's a trick. It's a deceitful substitution, certainly. And there are two strategies of dealing with this substitution. One strategy is to counterpose a different sort of ideology. In other words, to neutralize one ideology by another one. I believe this is tempting. It can be quite effective. Can be like a shortcut, to deal with ideology, just by producing another ideology. I'm sometimes being accused even of producing, another ideology that would substitute, the ideology of the Russian world. But I believe this is a wrong strategy. The correct strategy would be to liberate theology from the parasitism, from the parasite of ideology, because ideology parasitizes on theology, right? So it's not to infect the body of theology with another parasite, another ideology. It's about getting rid of ideology, of this parasite altogether. It's about liberating theology from ideology. And I believe this is a task for Ukraine. And this is really challenging for the Ukrainian community, theological, religious, and church community. On the one hand, indeed, it's tempting, to produce counter images, to produce counter ideology, in order to rebuke the ideology which is so aggressive and which brings so much pain and suffering to the people. On the other hand, I believe we need to avoid this kind of counteroffense. I think it is important to demonstrate the wrongness of the approach per se, the wrongness of the approach that presupposes this substitution of ideology with of theology, with ideology. And instead of producing counter images which just mirror, like in the mirror, you stand in the mirror, then your right hand appears to be left in the mirror. So instead of mirroring, the Russian propaganda or the Russian world, and substituting it with, with the Ukrainian propaganda, Ukrainian world, it's important to deconstruct the propaganda, to deconstruct the ideology, and to reveal to unfold what is beneath it, what is theological, what has been parasitized upon. Well, that's my theoretical, if you want, reflection on how to deal with the problem of weaponization of religion, imagery, liturgy, prayer, whatever. It's not by weaponization, in the right direction, as we believe, but it's about the demilitarization of those things.
So Dr. Anastasia Wooden asks a question, and I'll read it out and allow both of our participants here to respond to it. To which extent does the church-state relationship that exists now between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian Federation goes beyond Orthodox theology of church-state symphonia, and can it be perceived as justified from the perspective of this theology? So it's a two-part, and so I don't know if you want to, who wants to go first, but it's open.
Okay, let me start. It's a very big question, and I guess it's important to start with the experience of the church after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, when there was a kind of clear, there was a big discussion whether the church should sort of go underground and resist Bolsheviks, or whether the church should find a model of legal existence in the Bolshevik atheistic state. And after the Second World War, actually during the Second World War in 1943, Stalin decided, that was his decision, his personal decision as a dictator, to legalize the church. And the church became totally loyal to the atheistic state. So I think that's the here we can see the roots of this situation, the situation that we have now. Because one thing is to be in symphonia with a state that calls itself a kind of Christian state, or emperor that calls himself a Christian, and it's totally different when the church is loyal to the state and to the dictator, who kind of proclaims atheism as a state ideology. So in a way, that was a subordination, or the church subordinated to the totally non-Christian power. And after the collapse of Soviet Union, the church was kind of trying to re-establish relations with the state. But because of this historic trauma and this readiness in a way, to support violence against, not only just against, I don't know, atheists or those who are not in the church, but the church actually blessed violence against other Christians, and not just Christians, but members of the same church. Well, when the invasion started, Ukrainian Orthodox Church was an integral part, an important part of the Russian Orthodox Church. Yet Patriarch Kirill didn't manage to find a single word of compassion, a single word as a archpastor to those in Ukraine who are suffered, who bombed, who lost their loved ones, and that's so that's really kind of terrific. I mean, when the bishop, who is kind of supposed to preach gospel, don't care about love to his neighbor. I think that's in the core of the problem. And that is why I can't say that the official church in Russia is a Christian church, at least today.
That's Cyril.
If I just made to this, well, I'm afraid that the model of symphony between the church and the state in modern Russia is not very much different from the model of the same relationship that existed in the past and still exists in some cases, in the case of some churches. The only difference is not the type of symphony that Russia has. The problem is how the symphony is practiced. Well, as it happened to Russia many times before, Russia takes some ideas from outside and develops them to the extreme violent form, as it was, for example, with communism. Russia created a violent dictatorship on the basis of the communist ideas. So essentially, in the same sense, Russia took the idea of symphony. Actually, by the way, Patriarch Kirill just this week on Bright Tuesday, when was it? Like 2 days ago, in his sermon, referred explicitly to the idea of symphony. He said explicitly that we are enjoying symphony. It means that they're aware about what they're doing. They are implementing symphony, but the way how they implement symphony, I think, is quite different from what we expect symphony to be. It's a very violent form of symphony. It's the sort of symphony that brings, death. Sometimes I explain that what Russia is doing, it's waging a kind of culture war. The United States are ravaged by the culture wars, as we know. And in the United States, the society was very close to a violent outburst, as it was on the 6th of January last year. But Russia actually made the culture war the main kind of driver of the aggression. In the case of Russia, the culture wars, which are usually those culture wars, are, as I explained sometimes, are neither about culture nor about wars. But in the case of Russia, the culture wars were transformed into a war, a real war. So in the same sense, symphony, which is usually kind of a peaceful idea. Well, not all, well, historical in Byzantium, of course, it was different. There were many episodes of violence on the basis of symphony, but it does not presuppose necessarily violence, what I want to say. But in the case of Russia, we are dealing with the implementation of symphony, of the Byzantine concept of symphony, which is ultimately violent, ultimately bloodshedding. And yes, and this is the main problem of it. So the problem is not, well, I believe, well, maybe I'm saying kind of a controversial thing. I think the problem is not symphony per se. The problem is how it is implemented, and it is implemented in a very violent and unacceptable way.
Well, I think as I reflect on some of the verbiage that's been used, in a sense, is, we want to purify our people. We want to get rid of this evil or something. And what I find striking, from a moral theological point of view, is just the very simple reality that the ends don't justify the means. And this is a simple reality that, is part of the very teachings of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And this is what I find just absolutely disturbing, because you have a whole implementation of a view of Christianity that is, in a sense, not just the symphonia, but a triumphalistic. And somehow that, we are going to show you the right way it is to be Christian. And we're not going to show you by example. We're not going to show you by discussion. We're not going to show you by a book. We're going to point guns in your face and tell you now that we're liberating you from this evil. And to me, it's just shocking, because the evil is the gun. This is an unprovoked war. This idea that somehow they've been put into, this reactionary phase that well, there are all sorts of things, as you pointed out, Father Cyril, with the cultural rules that are going on, and there's struggles, absolutely. But as Christians, and I think as we look at the very, cross, death, and resurrection of our Lord, I mean, he didn't come with guns blazing. Maybe we wished he did, but he didn't. He died on a cross.
Yeah.
And through that crucifixion and resurrection, that heart of the Paschal mystery is how this functions in Christianity.
Exactly. I just want very briefly to add on top of that, it's interesting that in the same sermon on Tuesday, Patrick Kirill mentioned not just symphony, but also the idea of katechon, the one who holds, and the idea of apostasy, that Russia essentially resists the global apostasy and plays the role of katechon, in the global history, and it uses symphony as an instrument, to withstand the spreading evil. So all those terms, all those ideas are from the vocabulary, from the nomenclature of the Byzantine eschatology and Byzantine political theology. But the way how they are implemented, it's wild, it's really violent. And another point, just yesterday or actually today in my class, I explained to my student about Nazis and about the Auschwitz and Holocaust. I explained, look, Nazis essentially wanted to exterminate evil. They perceived evil as being embedded in a particular group of people, Jews and other social groups they wanted to exterminate. The Nazis were fighting evil, the cosmic, global evil, and they ended up by producing the ultimate evil, by fighting evil. I think that's exactly what is happening with Russia. In the words of Patriarch Kirill, it is fighting, Russia is fighting global evil, and ends up in producing the sort of evil which is really the purest form, if it is possible to say, the purest form of evil. That's exactly what the Nazis did.
Yeah, and I would add exactly, that's the Byzantine tradition of Symphonia is, it's clear that George Demakopoulos wrote a book studying the hymns of the 5th, 6th century. And it's amazing that that was the time when the blessing for violence appeared in church hymns and that was connected with the image of the cross. If before that time, the cross was the instrument of death, and it was mentioned only in connection with Christ. So the Christ suffered on the cross, and after that, in 6th century, the cross became a weapon or a symbol that kind of legalized violence against the enemies of the empire, non-Christians or non-Orthodox. So that even appeared in church hymns, and to sort of to bless a soldier who is fighting for the sake of the empire, and sort of provide him religious or even kind of theological or basis for that. Yeah, that's one of the signs. That's resulted from the symphony. So that's clear.
So when we think about all these issues and try to understand it in today's ecumenical context, what are your thoughts about what's happening? Certainly we know that Moscow protested the Pan-Orthodox gathering and didn't come. Is this a sign of its disaffiliation with Orthodoxy that isn't in line with its own ideas, or what is happening there?
Well, I interpret non-coming to Crete by Moscow in ascetical terms. It was a clear indication of pride, pride in the classical sense as the root of all evils. And we see how from this root sprang, bad fruits. I think there was no, at that time, particular ideology that prevented Moscow from going there. There were no real theological or ecclesial or whatever rational reasons. It was very emotional. I mean, the decision was taken very emotionally by one person, by Patriarch Kirill personally, I believe. And the kind of main driving force behind that decision, behind those emotions, was just pride. And out of that pride, we see how all other evils evolved eventually.
Well, I would add that actually Patriarch Kirill is sort of very Soviet in his views. And I think his main problem before the Council of Crete in 2016 was that, well, he was involved in sort of writing these documents for kind of 50 years. And if you're drafting documents for 50 years, you personally think that, well, now they are perfect, but in fact they were quite out of date, because the church 50 years ago is not the church today. So he was quite happy with his documents for quite some time, but I think the mistake, in a way, the mistake they did is that they published drafts of these documents sort of 4 months before the council, and there was a lot of critique. And I think Patriarch Kirill was afraid of critique from the right, from the Russian Orthodox fundamentalists, because he considered himself to be a leader of the conservative and even fundamentalist groups. in Russia, and he paid a lot of attention to these groups. And when he saw that they started to criticize him, I guess he was afraid. He was really afraid. And he realized that he cannot balance. He should sort of follow the path of these fundamentalists, and not even at the price of kind of not attending the council. So in a way, that was a fear also. You know, Patriarch Kirill himself was kind of brought up as a liberal, was educated as a rather liberal Christian leader, Orthodox leader, and then he decided to convert to be a conservative one. And real conservative Christian groups, they don't trust Kirill. They don't believe that he converted, that he is a real conservative now. They consider him still a liberal who was dressed up in conservative vestments. So that in a way, that was a personal personal problem of the patriarch, and he decided sort of to quit a few weeks before the council, and I think he caused much more problems in the Orthodox world because of that.
So if we think about this, I mean, certainly we could look at this, you know, does Russia see itself as, you know, this leader in what it would call ecumenism? Does it really see itself as the third Rome? And is that really what's happening here in terms of its, you know, idea to, you know, not behold itself unto Constantinopolitan jurisdiction or primacy?
Yeah, if I may pick up this question, answering also Anastasia. Well, speaking about the third world, third Rome, it is very similar to those, you know, funny and caricature kind of icons that began to be circulated in the 1990s. You know, they were marginal, they were out of any mainstream. I remember very well the time in the Moscow Patriarchate when, you know, the idea of the Third Rome was completely dismissed as crazy. And I remember very well, like the really towering figure, speaking about Anastasia, who is from Belarus, the figure of Metropolitan Filaret Vakhramiev of Minsk. He was at that time the head of the theological committee of the Russian Orthodox Church. And I remember kind of discussions with him about this Third Rome theories, and he just laughed at them. You know, they were perceived as crazy ideas, you know, promoted by crazy people, and the leadership of the Russian Church tried to keep them at bay as much as possible. And all of a sudden now, those things that were on the margins, you know, came to the center, became mainstream, and that concurs with the general tendency when the postmodern images, like the icons of Putin or whatever, the idea of the Third Rome, which was the same crazy, you know, marginal idea, all of a sudden became mainstream. All of a sudden, those postmodern ideas became modern again and became kind of serious again. That is in the line with other developments that we are discussing here.
Well, I would add that there is a certain inconsistency or certain problem because in certain context, yes, Russia and Russian Church believes or acts as if they follow this Third Rome concept. But in other situations, they react as a kind of representatives, as leaders of the nation state. So in some contexts, Russia is an empire, but in others, Russia is a nation state. And it's not that easy kind of to separate one from another. and it's not that easy to find the kind of the contradiction. I mean, we have to, it's a new model, and we are confused with it, because, well, could we say that Ruski Mir is in a way also kind of connected with this idea of the third Rome? Yes, but in some other cases we should say no. So what is true? I mean, these two conclusions could not be true at the same time, but they are. So I think we have to sort of to analyze that for a while. We don't have the reasonable kind of final answer to that.
So as we, have been playing with a lot of these different concepts and looking at, some basic ideas of what we believe is, if you will, ethical. Lauren asked a question, and she says, I'm considering other national contexts where prayer and the sacred could be seen as weaponized for political purposes. While this is a blatant and ugly example, other situations might be more subjective. I'd like to hear the panel's thoughts on where and how we draw the line.
Yeah, this is really hard because every line will be contextual. And I think it's impossible to find any sample of pure religion without any political admixture to it. It's unrealistic. Probably only the sort of religion preached by Jesus was completely apolitical, even though still he was accused of having a political agenda, for which reason he was killed, as we know. So it's impossible to find any, even modern, in the secularized world, modern religious form without any influence of politics. That's why it's impossible to draw the line, but I think it is impossible to assess the cases of politicized religion. And for me, the main criterion of assessing, religion, to what degree it is politicized, where is the red line, is violence, is bloodshed, is human blood. When blood is shed, then it is unacceptable. And certainly the Russian church has crossed this red line, way over, and it needs to be addressed in the way that we're addressing. Otherwise, let us be realistic. It's impossible to distill religion from politics, as it were.
And I totally agree with Father Cyril. I think the question of violence and kind of the blessing of violence and the justification of violence is extremely important in Christian context to sort of to judge whether the church is based on gospel or not. And but the second, I think there is a second also very important criteria is the kind of is truth, the proclamation of truth, because as we see with this war, there is a certain position when Christians are saying, and even there are quite a few monasteries who follow that path, they're saying, well, we are praying for peace. We should pray for peace. This is the commandment to preserve peace among the disciples of Christ, and we are following that path. We are not judging. We're not involved in violence. We're not ready to judge anyone. So we're just praying for peace. And I think this is a hypocrisy, because yes, we have to pray for peace, but we also have to say clearly who are on what side is, who started the war, who started the violence. And if we will be silent about that, our prayer for peace will not be honest. That it couldn't be like that.
I think for me, when we think about this question and the main message of the Lord when he came to his disciples was peace be with you. and that this is for me the central, sort of understanding about, if you will, authentic religion, or the sense of, well, what is a religious engagement, that is calling us forward. And I think that when we begin to look at that, and certainly we understand that one needs to defend oneself, when one is being attacked, but yet defense is a different thing than being on the offensive. And I think that that's, for me, the sort of real sense of it. Well, we're not fighting because we want to fight, or because we want to have our ideology to win, but we're fighting because we have to save ourselves and our lives, as we can see, numerous people. One of my most interesting images from early on and after the 2022 onslaught was a woman standing in the street talking to these soldiers and asking them, what are they doing here? This is not your land. This is my land. I don't know you. I didn't ask you to come here, and I didn't want you here. And so this is how I'm afraid that somehow the perversion of the whole message of Christianity, if you will, has taken such hold that the justification for invasion has been done in religious terms. And that's what needs to be rooted out. And that's why I think we need to understand, contexts like this cathedral, and other contexts, so that we can speak about them, and we can really, say, well, this just isn't authentic, and we need to critique them and look at those.
If I may, Father Mark, I completely agree with you. I think the problem with the cathedral, coming back to the main image, the main object of our discussion, the problem of the cathedral is not so much that it blesses, the religion politicized, because, well, so many churches are like that. The problem of the cathedral is that it blesses bloodshed. It blesses killings. That is the problem of the cathedral.
Yes, and it actually, if you will see the picture, it actually withdraws Christ from the center of this liturgical space. We see a lot of different elements, but they do not really correspond to the gospel narrative or to the liturgy. No kind of eschatology, no kind of second coming. It's just the Russian history. It's just the kind of glorification of the state, glorification of the victory during the Second World War, especially, and well, in a way, it's a kind of cathedral. It's the altar of the unknown God. I mean, this is. I doubt that if someone will enter this temple, someone will recognize that it's a Christian church. It's a temple of a unknown God of war, and I will be really happy to see this temple converted into kind of museum after the collapse of Putin's regime. This temple should be a museum showing how totalitarian regime is instrumentalizing and weaponizing the church and religion in general.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. Hey, and I don't think I could have said it any more clearly or succinctly. I think that was a beautiful place. We promised you an hour-and-a-half presentation, and we're at the end of that time right now. I don't know if either of you have any closing remarks that you would like to make before we call this symposium to an end. Father Kirill?
I just want to say amen to what Sergey said, and I think it was a very good conclusion.
Yeah, well, actually, I will just add that I have an article in German about this cathedral with more details in Osteuropa, in the last issue of the Osteuropa magazine. And well, I hope to translate it into English and publish it also. So this material will be available with kind of more details and better kind of described context.
Well, thank you both very much. I'm grateful for your participation today. This is the first in what we hope will be many such discussions. And one of the future projects we're looking at already is how do we talk about just war, and how do we talk about the ethics of war, and go to a little bit more in depth about what is Christianity saying, what is the Eastern theological, the Orthodox theological tradition saying, looking at some different aspects and whatnot. So we thank you all for participating today. We have recorded this webinar and we will make it available on our YouTube station here. So we're looking forward to it. We thank you and we ask you to spread the word, and we will continue to try to look at the complex issues and try to make them a little bit more digestible as we strive to hopefully shed light on this, which is a distortion of Christianity itself. So thank you all very much, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen. Christos voskresce.
Истинно
Воистину
воскрес
воскрес.
Господь.
Christos anesti.
Alethos anesti.
Христос Kyrios.
Thank you all.